You'd think saving the planet would be a pretty straightforward goal, right? Well, what if I told you the biggest hurdles aren't scientific at all? They're political. Today, we're jumping right into that global battle over our planet's resources, a fight where power, money, and plain old fairness are all on the line.
So, yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? We all want a healthy planet. So, why is it so incredibly hard to just agree on how to get there? Well, the answer, as you're about to see, comes down to one thing: politics.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. When we talk about forests or water or even the air we all breathe, what we're really talking about is who gets to use them, who benefits from that use, and who ends up paying the price. And that, right there, is where politics kicks in.
All right, first up, let's talk about nature's political crisis. This is where we're going to see how environmental damage isn't just some abstract scientific problem. No, it's a political one, and it has some very real, very serious consequences for people.
Just look at this number: 663 million. According to the UN, that's how many people in developing countries don't have access to safe drinking water. I mean, it's just a staggering reminder of the real human cost when we mismanage our planet's most basic resources.
So you have to ask, right? Who's causing all this environmental damage? Who's paying the price for it? And ultimately, who's responsible for fixing it? See, these aren't scientific questions. They're political. To answer them, you've got to wade into some really tough issues. Things like history, wealth, poverty, and power. Okay, so how does this whole conflict actually play out on the world stage? Well, that brings us to our next big idea: a planet divided. Because for decades, there's been this deep, deep split that has defined pretty much all of environmental politics. You know, this global awareness didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It really built up over time. It started with shockwaves from the Limits to Growth report back in the 70s, then came the big Our Common Future report in 87, and it all kind of came to a head at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio. That was the moment this whole issue was thrown onto the center stage of global politics.
And this slide really shows you the core of that divide at the summit. You had the wealthy nations, the global north, showing up concerned about things like ozone depletion and global warming, but then you had the developing nations, the global south, whose top priority was, understandably, economic growth. They came to the table with completely different agendas. So with such wildly different priorities, how in the world do you find any common ground? Well, the answer is you have to create a set of shared rules. So let's dive into the key principles that were designed to bridge this exact gap. Okay, the first big idea you need to know is the global commons. The easiest way to think about it is like the planet's shared property. We're talking about the atmosphere, the deep ocean floor, Antarctica, places no single country actually owns. And because nobody owns them, it means everyone has to agree on how to manage them together. And to try and bridge that big north-south divide, this absolutely crucial principle was created: common but differentiated responsibilities. The idea is actually pretty straightforward. It says, hey, we all share this planet, but the nations that historically contributed the most to the problem, through centuries of industrialization, they have a bigger responsibility to help fix it. And this wasn't just some nice idea they talked about. No, it was formally written right into the Rio Declaration. It was basically the whole world acknowledging that, yeah, the developed world's industrial revolution came at a massive cost to the planet, and because of that, they have a special obligation to lead the way now. And this principle had real-world teeth, It wasn't just talk. Take the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, for instance. It set binding emission targets for the industrialized nations, but it specifically exempted developing countries like China and India, giving them the room they needed to keep growing their economies. But, principles are one thing, and the real world, well, that's another story. This is where things get really intense. We're about to see the raw geopolitical struggle for control over the planet's most critical natural resources. So let's take oil, for example. A whopping 64% of the world's known oil reserves are packed into the Gulf region. When you have that much of such a vital resource in one place, it's no surprise that area becomes a permanent hotspot in global strategy. And here's the fundamental problem, right? The world's biggest consumers of that oil, the US, Europe, Japan, China, India, they're all located thousands of miles away. This massive geographic disconnect creates a constant source of strategic anxiety. So the question becomes, how do you secure access to all that oil? Well, the methods have included everything from deploying military forces and building up huge stockpiles to making political deals with the oil-producing countries. It's a massive, high-stakes game of geopolitical chess.
And listen, it's not just about oil anymore. As fresh water gets more and more scarce, a lot of experts are predicting that the next big conflicts of the 21st century could literally be water wars, fights over who controls this absolutely essential resource. But all of these global power struggles have a huge human impact, right? So for our final section, we're going to focus on the people who are right there on the front lines, the environmental movements, and the indigenous communities who are fighting back.
You see, some of the most powerful responses we're seeing are coming from the ground up. We're talking about forest movements in places like Brazil and Mexico, huge anti-mining campaigns against giant corporations, and massive anti-dam movements like the Narmada Bachao Andolan in India. These are vibrant, powerful social movements, and they are pushing back hard. And then there are the indigenous peoples. They often use this phrase, since time immemorial. And when they say that, it's not just about history. It speaks to this deep, sacred, generational connection they have to their lands and ecosystems. Ecosystems that are now under threat from development and resource extraction. You have to understand, for these communities, this isn't some abstract policy debate. Losing their land is a direct threat to everything: their economic survival, their culture, and their very identity. It's an existential threat. So that brings us full circle, right back to where we started. The real question about our shared future, it isn't just about science or some new technology. It's about justice, it's about power, and it's about responsibility. At the end of the day, the challenge isn't really, can we save the planet? It's, can we all agree on a fair way to do it before it's too late?